The day my father died, my sister called me before the paramedics even left the driveway. Not to tell me she loved me, not to say she was scared or that she needed her big brother. She called to tell me I wasn't in the will. I remember exactly where I was standing, in the parking garage at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, 3rd floor, near the elevator bank. My car keys still in my hand from the drive I'd just made in 47 minutes flat, because Mom called and said it was time. I hadn't even seen his body yet. I hadn't had one single second to feel it, and my sister Lauren's voice came through the phone, like she'd been waiting to say it for years. Dad already handled everything, Connor. The house, the accounts, the business, it's all taken care of. I just thought you should know before the lawyer meeting. I said, Lauren, he's not even cold. She said, I know, I'm just trying to be transparent. I hung up and stood there in that concrete garage, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of exhaust and rain. And I felt something shift in me. Not break. Shift. Like a wall that had been leaning for a long time, finally finding its angle. Here's what you need to understand about my family. On the surface, we looked normal. Robert and Diane Ashford of Franklin, Tennessee. 2 kids, Lauren, 32, and me, Connor, 35. Dad ran a mid-sized commercial landscaping company called Ashford Green, the kind of business that doesn't make headlines but quietly prints money for 30 years. Nice house in a nice suburb. Yearly vacations to the Gulf Coast. Christmas cards with the golden retriever. But underneath that, running like a fault line through everything, was a preference so obvious and so total that calling it favoritism feels almost generous. Lauren was the chosen one. Had been since we were kids. I don't say that with bitterness the way people do when they're exaggerating. I say it as a statement of documented fact. When Lauren wanted a car at 16, she got a used Honda. When I asked for the same thing at 16, my father said I should earn it. I did. I worked weekends at a hardware store for 8 months and bought a 12-year-old Civic with a cracked dashboard. My mother framed Lauren's car keys in a shadow box. I'm not making that up. She actually did that. When Lauren dropped out of UT after 1 semester, they sat her down, had a calm conversation, paid for her apartment, while she found herself for 14 months. When I changed my major from pre-law to business, my father called it a failure of nerve and told me I owed him an apology for wasting a semester of tuition on classes that didn't matter. And the business. That's the one that really set the table for everything that came after. I came to work at Ashford Green the summer after I graduated from Belmont. I wasn't asked. I showed up, told my dad I wanted to learn it from the ground up, and he let me. I spent 3 years doing everything. Route management, client proposals, equipment maintenance scheduling, subcontractor negotiations. I was good at it. I knew I was good at it because the numbers said so. Client retention went from 71% to 88% in the 2 years I managed the residential division. We added 6 commercial accounts worth a combined $340,000 in annual contracts. My father's response to that was to hire Lauren as the director of client relations. Lauren, who had never worked a day in the business. Lauren, who had spent the previous 3 years doing freelance social media content for local boutiques and calling it a career. She walked in on a Monday morning with a title on a business card and a salary $15,000 higher than mine. I asked my father about it privately. He said, Lauren needs stability. You're already stable, Connor. That's a compliment. I want to remember his exact words because I repeated them to myself a lot in the years that followed. I want to be precise. He said, You're already stable. That's a compliment. I stayed 2 more years after that. I don't know why exactly. Loyalty, maybe. Hope. The irrational belief that if I just kept doing good work, it would eventually be seen for what it was. My mother reinforced that belief every time she said things like, Your father respects you more than you know, and Lauren just needs more help right now. As if my entire purpose in the family structure was to need less. I left Ashford Green in 2019. Quietly. I gave 90 days notice, trained my replacement, handed over every document and process I'd built, and walked out. My father shook my hand at the door like I was a departing employee, not his son. My mother cried and said she hoped I wasn't making a mistake. Lauren sent a group text that said, Wishing you the best on your next adventure, with a sun emoji. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. I had $47,000 in savings, a business plan I'd been quietly building for 18 months, and nothing left to lose. I started a commercial landscaping and grounds management company called Meridian Green Services. I knew the industry, I knew the margins, I knew every mistake my father had made, and I knew how not to make them. The first year was brutal. I slept on an air mattress in a one-bedroom apartment in Nodar for 4 months. I drove a leased truck I could barely afford. I had 2 employees and 1 commercial client, a mid-size office park in Ballantyne that paid $4,200 a month. I ate a lot of rice and a lot of pride, but by year 2 I had 11 clients and 8 employees. By year 3, I had a real office, a fleet of 4 trucks, and $1.1 million in annual revenue. By 2023, Meridian Green was doing $3.8 million with 26 employees and a municipal contract with Mecklenburg County worth $280,000 a year. I didn't tell my parents any of this, not out of spite, at least not at first. I didn't tell them because they never asked. Sunday calls with my mother lasted 7 minutes and covered 3 topics: her garden, whatever Lauren was doing, and a perfunctory "how's work" that I answered with "good," because that was the word they wanted and the conversation they could handle. My father and I barely spoke after I left. We texted on birthdays. We saw each other at Thanksgiving and Christmas. He once told me at Christmas in 2021 that he hoped I was keeping my head above water, which I understood to be his version of affection. Lauren knew I'd started a company. She'd made a comment about it once, something about how it must be cute to run a small operation, and I had smiled and said yeah and moved on. She didn't know the scope. Nobody in my family did, and I had stopped trying to show them. Then my father got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. Diagnosed in March of 2024. He was 67. He'd been having back pain for months and ignored it. The way men of his generation treat their bodies like equipment they're not allowed to complain about. By the time they found it, the window for surgery had mostly closed. They gave him 8 to 14 months. I drove to Franklin the weekend after my mother called. I walked into that house and saw my father sitting in the recliner he'd had since I was a teenager, and he looked small in a way I'd never seen him look, and I felt something crack open in my chest that had nothing to do with the business, or Lauren, or the years of being the overlooked son. He was my father. He was dying. That's all that mattered right then. We talked. Really talked, maybe for the first time in years. He told me he was proud of me for striking out on my own. He said it the way men like him say things. Once, quietly, without follow-up, as if the words cost him something. I told him I loved him. He nodded. That was the most we'd said to each other in a decade. What I didn't know, what nobody told me, was that during that same period, Lauren was spending every weekend in Franklin. She was having dinner with them 3 nights a week. She'd taken on a role I can only describe as campaign manager, positioning herself as the devoted daughter while I was the son who'd left. My mother told me later, much later, that Lauren had told them I was doing okay but struggling in Charlotte, that I was too proud to ask for help, that she was worried about me. I was doing $3.8 million in revenue. Lauren was worried about me. She was also, I learned, involved in conversations about the will and the business succession that I had no idea were happening. My father's attorney, a man named Gerald Puckett, who'd handled the family's legal work for 20 years, later told me that Lauren had been present at 3 separate meetings about estate planning in the final 6 months of my father's life. I was present at 0. I hadn't been told the meetings were occurring. My father died on a Tuesday morning in October 2024. Heart gave out, which sometimes happens with pancreatic cancer. My mother called me at 6:47 a.m. I was already dressed for a site walkthrough. I got in my truck and drove the 4 hours to Franklin, and Lauren called me before I'd made it to the interstate. The lawyer meeting was 2 weeks after the funeral. Gerald Puckett's office, a beige suite in a professional park off Columbia Avenue. Wood-panelled conference room, water pitcher, a box of tissues on the table that I thought was a strange touch until the meeting started and I understood why it was there. My mother sat on one side of the table. Lauren sat next to her, hand on Mum's arm. I sat across from them. Gerald sat at the head. He was in his 60s, reading glasses, the careful, measured tone of a man who has delivered hard news so many times, it no longer surprises him. He read the will. The house went to my mother, which I expected. The personal accounts, which totaled about $180,000, were split. $120,000 to my mother, $60,000 to Lauren. Nothing to me. I was named in the document once in a section that said, "To my son, Connor Robert Ashford, I leave my personal library and the 1967 Chevrolet pickup currently stored at the Franklin property, as he has already demonstrated the independence and self-sufficiency that requires no further provision from this estate." The truck was worth maybe $4,000. The books were worth nothing. Ashford Green, the business, 30 years of work, 11 employees, $2.2 million in annual revenue, was left entirely to Lauren. I sat perfectly still while Gerald read it. I didn't move. I could feel Lauren looking at me from across the table. My mother was crying quietly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, not looking at me. When Gerald finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then Lauren said, "Dad wanted you to have the freedom to keep building your own thing, Connor. He said that specifically. He was proud of you for being independent." I looked at her. I looked at her for a long time without saying anything. Then I said, "Gerald, was I present for any of the meetings where this will was drafted or revised?" Gerald cleared his throat. "The final revisions were made in August." "Was I notified?" A pause. "The estate planning process is typically coordinated by the primary family contacts. In this case, was I notified?" "No," he said. I stood up, picked up the keys to the 1967 Chevrolet that Gerald had slid across the table in a small envelope, and I walked out of that office without another word. I drove to a Waffle House on the edge of town and sat in a corner booth for 2 hours, drinking coffee and staring out the window at the parking lot. A waitress named Brenda refilled my cup 4 times without asking. At some point I became aware that I was not going to cry. I was going to do something else entirely. What I did was make a phone call. The person I called was a woman named Patricia Okafor, a business attorney in Charlotte, who had handled 2 acquisitions for Meridian Green over the past 3 years. I told her everything. The will, the meetings I hadn't been informed of, Lauren's presence at the estate planning sessions, the language in the document about my independence. I told her I wanted to know if there was anything legally actionable. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Connor, how much is your company currently worth?" I told her. The most recent valuation, done for a line of credit application 6 months prior, had placed Meridian Green Services at approximately $6.4 million. Another pause. "And your father's company, Ashford Green, you said $2.2 million in revenue." "Correct." "Okay," she said. "Here's what I want you to do. Don't say anything to your family. Don't respond to anything Lauren sends you. And let me make some calls." What Patricia found over the next 3 weeks was not what I expected. She found that the will had been revised 4 times in the last 14 months of my father's life, each revision moving more of the estate toward Lauren. She found that Lauren had, in at least 2 documented cases, provided information to Gerald Puckett that was factually inaccurate, specifically that I had expressed disinterest in the family business and declined involvement in estate conversations. There was an email Lauren had sent to Gerald in July, 2 months before the final revision. That said, "Connor has made it clear he wants no part of the family estate. He told me directly that he has no interest in Ashford Green and considers himself fully separate from the family's financial matters." I had never said that. I had never said anything close to that. And Patricia, when she showed me the email, said the phrase "made it clear" and "told me directly" constituted a potential claim of fraudulent misrepresentation in the estate process, depending on what we could establish about the timeline and my father's mental state during the final revisions. We filed a formal contest of the will in November 2024. Lauren called me the day she was served. She was furious in the way people are furious when they've been caught. Not the clean anger of someone wronged, but the jagged, high-pitched panic of someone who realizes the story they've been telling is about to be examined in the light. "You're going to destroy this family," she said. "Lauren," I said, "the family was already destroyed. I'm just doing the paperwork." She said I was bitter. She said Dad had made his wishes clear. She said I was humiliating Mum by dragging this into a courtroom. I let her say all of it. Then I said, "I want to ask you something. When you told Gerald Puckett that I'd expressed disinterest in the estate, what exactly were you hoping would happen?" Silence. "Because I never said that," I said. And you know I never said that. And now Patricia Okafor knows it too. She hung up. The deposition took place in January 2025. Gerald Puckett, under oath, confirmed that the information about my alleged disinterest had come from Lauren. He also confirmed that he had not independently verified it. He confirmed that the final revision to the will had been made when my father was on a medication regimen that included 2 drugs known to affect cognitive clarity. Patricia had a neurologist ready to testify about the pharmacology, but here's where it gets complicated. Here's the part I didn't see coming. 3 days before the scheduled mediation, my mother called me. Not from her home phone, from a number I didn't recognise. I almost let it go to voicemail. She said, "Connor, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I said, "Okay." She told me that 6 months before my father died, he had come to her and told her he was thinking about changing the will to be more equitable, that he'd been watching me from a distance, reading industry newsletters, asking around through old contacts, and he had found out about Meridian Green. He had found out what it had become. And he felt, she said, her voice very quiet, he felt ashamed. He told her he wanted to call me. He told her he wanted to make it right. But by then the cancer had progressed and the medications were heavier, and the conversations kept getting deferred, and then suddenly they were out of time. But before he ran out of time, he did one thing. He wrote me a letter. Not through Gerald, not through the estate. He gave it to a man named Dennis Carver, his oldest friend, a retired contractor he'd known since 1987, with instructions to hold it and give it to me 1 year after his death unless he'd already spoken to me directly. Dennis Carver was sitting in a diner in Franklin, Tennessee, with a sealed envelope and my mother's phone number, waiting for her signal. My mother had been waiting to know which way the legal fight would go. She'd been scared. She'd been caught between her children for 30 years, and she didn't know how to stop being caught. But when she heard about the deposition, when she understood what Lauren had actually done, the emails, the lies to the attorney, the systematic construction of a story designed to erase me, she called Dennis. I drove to Franklin that Saturday morning. Dennis Carver was 71. Big hands, quiet eyes, the kind of man who uses 12 words when 8 will do. He handed me the envelope across the table of a diner called Dots on Highway 96. It was sealed with tape and had my name on it in my father's handwriting. I recognised it immediately. He had terrible handwriting. Always had. I waited until I was in my truck to open it. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten, dated August 14th, 2024. 2 months before he died. I'm not going to reproduce all of it. Some of it is mine. But here is what I will tell you. My father knew. He knew what Lauren had been doing. He knew about the estate meetings. He knew she'd been shaping the narrative. He wrote, "I let it happen because I was tired and I was afraid of conflict, and because Lauren has always known how to make herself necessary to me, and I'm ashamed of that." He wrote about Meridian Green. He'd found a profile of the company in a regional business journal from 2023. He'd read it alone in his office and not told anyone. He wrote, "You built something real. You built it without my help, which I once thought was a compliment to you, and now understand was a failure of me." And then on page 3, he told me about the account. In 2018, the year before I left Ashford Green, my father had opened a separate investment account in both our names. He hadn't told me. He put $50,000 in it and continued contributing to it over the years, quietly, without fanfare. He wrote, "I didn't know how to give it to you directly, without it becoming a conversation I wasn't brave enough to have. So I saved it instead. The account information is with Dennis. Gerald doesn't know about it. Lauren doesn't know about it." I sat in the truck for a long time after I read that. The account, when Dennis gave me the details, and I had Patricia verify them, had grown to $214,000. The mediation happened in February. Lauren arrived with her own attorney, a man who'd clearly been told the situation was straightforward. It was not straightforward. Patricia laid out the documentation, the emails, the deposition, the medication records, the timeline of will revisions. Lauren's attorney asked for a 15-minute recess. The recess lasted 45 minutes. They came back, and Lauren settled. She didn't get everything she'd planned. The final agreement restructured the estate. She retained Ashford Green, which was always going to be hers in some form, but the liquid assets were redistributed equitably, and a formal acknowledgement was made, on record, that information provided to the estate attorney had been materially inaccurate. Lauren did not look at me when she signed the documents. My mother was not at the mediation. She was at home in Franklin. I called her afterward, sitting in Patricia's parking lot in Charlotte, the late February sky flat and grey overhead. "It's done," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you okay?" I thought about that. The question felt new coming from her, not performative, not a box to check. She actually wanted to know. "I'm getting there," I said. She said, "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I'd like to see you, just to see you." I said I'd think about it, and I meant it, which was more than I could have said 6 months earlier. What I didn't expect, the final turn that I still think about sometimes on long drives, was what happened with Ashford Green. Lauren took possession of the company in March. She had no operational experience. She had the title she'd been given 9 years ago, and the assumption that running a business is a personality trait rather than a skill set. By May, 2 of the company's largest commercial clients had not renewed their contracts. By June, 3 of the 11 employees had resigned. I heard about it through old industry contacts, people my father had known, subcontractors who'd worked with Ashford Green for years and were quietly looking for new primary relationships. In July, Lauren called me. I saw her name on the screen and I let it ring. Then I called her back 2 days later because I had made a decision and I needed to be the one who chose the timing. She said the company was struggling. She said she didn't know what she was doing. She said it in a way that cost her something. I could hear it, the particular flattening of her voice that happens when Lauren Ashford admits she's wrong, which across 35 years I had heard maybe twice. I said, "I know." She said, "I need help." I said, "I know that too." What I offered her was not charity, and it was not rescue. I offered her a management services contract. Meridian Green would provide operational consulting for Ashford Green for a period of 18 months, at a rate that was fair and professional, and put nothing in writing that resembled forgiveness. Because I wasn't there yet. I'm still not there yet, if I'm honest. But I am my father's son, in the ways that mattered to him before the fear got the better of him. I know how to run a business. I know how to keep people employed. I know that 11 families depend on Ashford Green showing up every Monday morning, and I am not willing to let them disappear because of what happened between me and my sister. So I helped. My name is not on the building. My name is not on the contract that clients see. I show up twice a month in a truck with Meridian Green on the door, and I do the work and I leave. Lauren and I exchange approximately 40 words per visit. It is not warm and it is not resolved, and I think it may never be fully either of those things. My mother came to Charlotte in April. I took her to lunch at a restaurant near my office, a nice place with a patio that overlooks the city. She asked real questions. She asked about the municipal contract and how the hiring process worked and whether I ever wanted to take on residential clients or if commercial was always going to be the focus. She asked like she actually wanted to know. I answered the same way. At some point she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said, "I should have seen you." I said, "Yeah, you should have." She nodded. She didn't make excuses. That mattered more than I can explain. I still have the letter. 4 pages of my father's terrible handwriting, folded in thirds, in a fireproof box in my home office in Charlotte. I've read it probably a dozen times. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't undo the Sunday dinners or the business or the will or the year I spent on an air mattress in Noda, proving I could do it alone. But it tells me something I needed to know, that he saw me at the end, that he knew what I'd built, that somewhere in the silence between us, he was watching. I think about that on the good days. On the hard days, I think about what it costs a person to stay quiet for so long that the truth has to be delivered by a retired contractor in a diner 2 months after you're gone. I park in the lot behind my office some mornings before anyone else arrives, and I sit in the truck with my coffee, and I look at the building with the Meridian Green logo on the door, the building I pay the lease on, the building where 26 people show up to work because I showed up first. And I think about what my father said in that letter. He said, "You built something real without my help." Now I understand that was never a compliment. It was a debt I didn't know how to pay. I don't need the debt paid anymore. But I'll take the letter. Some inheritances don't come from a will. They come from finally understanding what your father was trying to say, when he didn't have the courage to say it out loud and choosing to build something with it anyway.